Welcome to our second installment in Finger Lakes Wine Month's virtual wine tasting series. We are celebrating Finger Lakes Wine Month this month, and it's a great time to celebrate as we're going through bud break here in the Finger Lakes in the last week to 10 days. The vineyards look beautiful, the green all popping out across the beautiful lakes that we have here in the Finger Lakes. And if you folks who are tasting with us this evening haven't had a chance to come here, we definitely want to invite you to come and see the scenic beauty that the Finger Lakes has. And this evening, the point of our tasting is to let you try some delicious Finger Lakes Rieslings. We have 6 wines that have been flighted with the IRF scale. The IRF scale is a scale which compensates for the acid and pH and sugar of the wine, and it flights the wines the way we feel that you think they'll taste. So if we have a wine that is flighted as being dry, it might actually have some residual sugar, but according to the scale, the winemaker feels that that's what that wine is going to taste like to you. So it's meant to be helpful for consumers and also to us to have kind of a uniform platform where we're all speaking the same language. This evening we're going to start out flight 1 with 3 delicious dry Rieslings. Our first winemaker this evening is going to be the owner of Swedish Hill Winery, Dave Peterson. Swedish Hill is one of the largest wineries in the Finger Lakes. They year in and year out produce excellent wines and win numerous major awards for their Rieslings. Dave's going to pour for you this evening his 2011 dry Riesling. Dave, you want to tell us a little bit about 2011 and how that wine was made?
Well, I think it'll be interesting to look at or taste the wines tonight, as there are a couple of 2011s and mostly 2012s. The last 3 vintages have really been pretty warm vintages for Riesling here in the Finger Lakes. 10, 11, and 12 all had some similarities, yet 11, particularly during the harvest period, was maybe more challenging, although I think there were a lot of really good Rieslings made in the Finger Lakes out of 11, even though 12 was probably a little bit more ideal in terms of a winemaker's year. But most of these, the Rieslings in general, I think a lot of the differences, besides vintage, are going to be vineyard related. And there's a lot of things that go into that. There's differences certainly within our vineyards, and also we have clonal differences as well. So the Riesling that we're showing tonight is actually a blend of fruit from our Blue Waters vineyard on Cayuga Lake. It's a vineyard very close to the lake, a lower elevation vineyard, very high limestone soils, and it's a 12-acre Riesling block with 2 different clones, clone 90 and 239. And they're grown on several different rootstocks as well. And we certainly see variation in flavors within clones, within sections of the vineyard as well. And we're just starting to learn some more of those differences. This vineyard was planted primarily in 2006, at least the fruit that's in this wine. It also has fruit from Seneca Lake on the west side of Seneca Lake, from the Humphreys Overlook Vineyard. That's clone 239. So this wine is primarily a blend of clone 90 from our Cayuga Lake Estate Vineyards and clone 239 from the Seneca Lake Vineyard. 11, as I mentioned, pretty warm year, but the grapes were ripening very quickly relative to some of the other years. It was warm right up into the fall, and then there was actually quite a bit more moisture during the harvest period, something we all didn't want to see coming. It was setting up as an ideal year in a lot of vineyards, and so I think there had to be a lot more fruit selection in a year like 2011. We also maybe didn't have as much luxury of hang time as we did in 2010 or 2012, unless you wanted to encourage botrytis because there was more moisture. So there were a couple different vineyard timings of harvest in this case as well. We picked 1 lot of the clone 90 grapes just before the rain started, and that was a little bit lower bricks. And when you're dealing with Riesling, you can deal with different harvest times, and get different flavor profiles. It's not like Cabernet Franc or some of the other varieties that we deal with where you're sort of waiting until a peak point of harvest, but you can get different flavors by picking stepwise. It was probably a good thing in 2011 to do that, and we made a second harvest probably about 2 weeks later. The Overlook vineyard from Seneca Lake was picked in the later time frame. So the winemaking was pretty straightforward. That was cool fermented, very little crushing of the grapes. We do kind of open up the rollers on the crusher and just basically de-stem any stems that are still left in there. Most of the fruit is also picked. We've gone more to what we call night or at least early morning harvest. So between 5 and 8 a.m. is when we pick most of the grapes, trying to take advantage of cooler temperatures, especially since we've had some warmer harvests here. So it was, there is press fraction separation within these. So lighter pressed fractions are separated from heavier press fractions. What we see in this wine, I think, is developing, and there's a good contrast in the three wines in front of us here, where a year of bottle age is showing some of the slight petrol sort of characters starting to develop in that wine. And we see, I think, these warmer vintages, a little bit faster development of the wines than we do in a cooler year like 2009, which took a while for the fruit really to come out in the 9s, but really came out nicely with time. And one of the other things I thought I'd point out on this wine, it was an interesting year in that I think we saw very low pHs given the amount of acidity in the wines. The acidity is not particularly high in this wine as far as Riesling goes, but very low pH. 2.87 is quite low given the, normally when we have a pH that low, we'd expect a lot higher titratable acidity in the wine. So I think that certainly adds to the structure. If it had a higher pH, the wine might seem a little flat.
So we had a question, Dave, which I think you kind of already answered, but someone had asked if the 2011 was a typical year for Riesling, or if you would call it more atypical. You kind of touched base on how it differed from 2009 and 2010.
We've been through 27 vintages. We're still trying to understand what typical is. I think each year is so different. I don't calling something average or typical is difficult to put your finger on, and I think we've had warmer years in recent years. We've had more warm years than what we had, say, 15 or 20 years ago. So we're seeing maybe somewhat of a trend. Maybe it's a global warming effect. Maybe it's just a cycle. But these type of years are becoming more typical. One of the things with global warming that sometimes is pointed out is more extremes in types of conditions. So I think that extremes can mean a lot of things. In some cases it can be good with mild winters and those sort of things. But occasionally we may see some of these years where we get a little bit more moisture. But I think it also shows the difference in years also shows how good Riesling is for the region, because in spite of the differences in years, I think it's hard to think of bad Riesling years in the last 10 years, for example.
Dave, one other thing, what's the suggested retail price of that wine?
That wine sells for $16.
And some folks who are interested in distribution of it, where they can find that wine?
We are distributed primarily in New York, both in the metro New York market as well as upstate, also in Massachusetts, and then in other states that allow shipping from New York. So,
great. Thank you very much, Dave. Next up this evening, we have with us Steve DeFrancesco from Glenora Wine Cellars. Steve has been making Riesling in the Finger Lakes for a long time. He has a great reputation for his Rieslings, and he's pouring his 2012 dry Riesling this evening. Steve's going to talk to us a little bit about that 2012 growing year and how he made this wine. And Steve, you wanted to quickly take us through how you made this wine, and why don't I have you start right off and tell me what the retail price on that is, and where folks could find that wine.
Okay, Jeff. It's $14.99 a bottle, and we're distributed through Empire Merchants North, just like Davis. And in New York City, we're with Upstate. We're in Illinois and a little bit in Virginia also. And we can ship to several states too. So,
Great.
And we're trying our 2012, as you just pointed out. It was a pretty warm year, as Dave was saying. And we buy or work with growers. We have 8 different Riesling growers from the west side of Cayuga Lake to the west side of Seneca Lake, but most of them are from the east side of Seneca Lake, actually. And there are certainly the mesoclimates of the different locations of vineyards here in the Finger Lakes, but beyond that, beyond just the soil, there are, I think, sunlight differences. And the sun comes up in the east and hits the west side of the lake first, and kind of dries the dew out, I think. But it's cooler at that time of the day. And then by the time it's in the afternoon, then it's hitting the east side of the lake. So in this area, I kind of like to think of Champagne a little bit, because Champagne, France is an area that has many different aspects and different things that the land gives to those grapes that are grown there, and I think that happens here too. Plus, our vintages are not as consistent as some, but I know everywhere has vintage variation too. But in the Finger Lakes, being cool, I think our variations can be even more so. So sometimes in a warm year, actually the presumably cooler sides of the lakes, or the west sides, can retain their acidity and fruit flavors a little differently than they will where it's a little bit warmer. And this Riesling we're pouring right now is 70% from the west side of Seneca Lake, from Glenora Farms vineyard, mostly 239 clone, and about 8 different blocks that go back to the 1970s, and as recently as maybe 10 years ago. And then it's about 30% from Dalrymple Vineyard on the east side of Seneca, and that's all 239, fairly new planting, but a very nice block of grapes.
As far as just the making of that wine, Steve, anything that you'd like to share with just general practices with Riesling production for you?
Sure. We like it when there's a really nice harvester that picks them, and there are some nice harvesters out there. Gregoire from France and Corbin from Washington State. They do a really nice, clean job, and if we can pick them when it's cool and hold them in the bins, these are mechanically harvested, but very clean harvest. And we can hold them in the bins overnight and then press them the next day. And then we, just like Champagne, France, we like to make lots of different components from the different growers and different styles within them, and sometimes the grapes tell us how sweet they're going to be because they get stuck with sugar more than we want, which is okay because we can use that to fine-tune the sugar later on.
So that's one benefit of making a lot of wine.
Yes, you have lots of things.
A lot of blending components.
Exactly.
We had a question, Steve, for you about what do you think defines Finger Lakes Riesling and sets them apart?
Well, I think that right now there are a lot of young winemakers like me and you guys, and even younger ones coming onto the scene. And if anything, I think there are more drier Rieslings out there, or at least they're being noticed, and that's really neat because they're interesting wines that people can collect, and I think that's helping to put us on the map a little bit. And unfortunately, we still hear people say, I don't like Riesling because I don't like sweet. because they think of Milk, which was not Riesling. And that gave Riesling a bad reputation back in the 70s when there were lots of inexpensive, not necessarily well-made German wines that people associate Riesling with, and they weren't even Riesling. So Jancis Robinson and Hugh Johnson say it's the greatest white wine ever, and I can't argue with that. And I think that, and as Dave said, too, that in any year we can make really neat wine. It might be a little bit different if it's really cool or really warm.
We had another question just came in, and I don't think it's that uncommon. People ask, like, do we have a legal limit for calling wine a dry Riesling in the Finger Lakes? And Steve, you could touch for a minute. We use in the Finger Lakes the IRF scale,
Yes.
and we don't have a legal limit for calling a wine dry.
Right.
But if we use that, you want to just kind of briefly talk about that, Steve?
Sure. The IRF scale looks and acts simple, but it's actually a little bit complicated to decide because it's based on the acidity and even the pH. If the pH is really low, that can shift a numerically higher residual sugar number into a drier category because of the perception. And I think that if you take a wine from a cool climate at 1% sugar or 10 grams per liter, it's going to taste a lot drier than one from other places that's 1%. It'll actually taste kind of sweet, like a white Zinfandel or something.
So the goal is kind of on the IRF scale that and for folks who are listening, it's a slider basically that goes from dry all the way down to sweet.
Yes.
And the winemakers are hopefully putting that where they feel the customers are going to taste, how they feel that wine's going to taste. Yeah. Well, we're going to have to move along, Steve, to our third wine of the night. Thank you very much. Our third panelist tonight, we have with us Chris Stamp. Chris is a longtime winemaker, and his family owns Lakewood Vineyards, also on Seneca Lake. Chris makes some great Riesling along with a variety of other wines. And like I said, this first panel, we've got all kinds of experience. Now, I don't know if that means these guys are some of the older ones or they just have a lot of experience. I don't know. But I don't know. They're going to throw something at me in a second. But no, Chris does a great job, and he brought with him tonight his 2012 dry Riesling. And Chris, why don't we start off with the suggested retail price on that wine?
About $100 a bottle. That's the suggested. Okay, but $12.99.
$12.99. Great. So that's probably on the lower end of some of these wines.
Yeah, it is. It's not a reflection of quality, I assure you.
Definitely not. And where can folks find wine, Chris?
I would say go to our website. We have a list, a very actively upkept list on there for our wines and where they're located. We also we can sell in quite a number of states now, and I think we have some on Amazon.com. So
very cool.
There's a lot of different options for getting your hands on it.
Well, you want to kind of take us through, Chris, Lakewood's kind of method of making Riesling. Talk a little bit about 2012 and how you made that wine.
Well, you've listened to two winemakers tell you already, we're not going to be a lot different. And I think that there's a lot of consistencies because it's not Chardonnay where, what kind of oak do you use? Do you leave it on the lees? Do you, when do you take it out? This is, in most cases, Riesling is a fruit-forward wine, and everything that we do in the wine cellar is about preserving that fruit and keeping the wine fresh. And really highlighting the terroir of the grape, and so we don't do a lot of different things here. There's probably little things that are kind of logistical because of your facility. But this particular wine is from 3 different blocks. We have 6 different blocks of Riesling on the farm, and we keep them all separate. They all come in separate. We do like David mentioned, we start picking about the time you can almost see your hand in front of your face. Riesling usually comes in quite late in the season, so we have cold nights then. Even though the days will get up to 80 degrees, a lot of times those nights can dip down into the 30s, and that's perfect Riesling picking weather. So we'll get up and we'll be out there in the morning, and we machine pick the grapes. If there's any reason that they need sorting, we go through the vineyard and we hand sort and cut stuff out that we don't want in there, rather than hand picking them, because we really feel that it's an advantage to machine pick them, because you can get them all at once, you can get them all cold, you can get them delivered to the winery right now. And so and our vineyards are all located right next to the winery, so the grapes are carted up there and we're literally dumping bins, and that's where we don't do skin contact at all, but grapes come directly in and go into the presses right away. Pretty straightforward. Cool fermentation, Epernay 2 yeast. We do stop, as you know, time's gone by, we've gotten to know all these different blocks of Riesling. We have some that we feel are definitely better for our sweet Riesling. They're different clones, they're on different sites. A lot of times, well, actually our block one always goes to our sweet Riesling. It has more peach and pear, and if I was going to make a dry Riesling out of it, you'd smell it and you'd go, oh, this is going to be sweet, and then your palate would be disappointed because you've got this peach pear aroma so strong in your mind. So we use more lime peel mineral blocks for this one. This is actually block 3, 4, and what we call the wedge. It's another vineyard. They all get named without any thought to marketing, I assure you. And so the wedge is actually our youngest vineyard, and but it has real nice citrus, but it had more peach, I think, because of the warm summer that we had. We had more peach and pear in that. So as a dry Riesling, this one's probably got a little more peach and pear than we usually see. Usually it's more lime peel and mineral, but I'm perfectly happy with that. But it's not so much of it that your palate is thinking it's going to be sweet. It's finished at 8.3 grams per liter, and just slightly over that in acid is 8.4 grams per liter acid. So,
Of course, one of our media members had asked if they felt like they were picking up like a little Sauvignon Blanc character in the nose of the wine.
Something we get is just this kind of tinge of grapefruit.
Not that uncommon in Finger Lakes Rieslings,
no,
right?
it's not. But I think in our vineyards, I really started noticing it about 6 years ago, to the degree that we've seen it. I haven't seen it grow anymore. We don't grow any Sauvignon Blanc, so we didn't accidentally.
No full blend.
No, it's not. It's 100% Riesling, but it does have a little bit of that. And I think you'll see it as a common. Well, if you had a lineup of our Rieslings, you'd see a common thread of that to some degree or other. We have 3 different Rieslings now, so it's something you see to some degree or another in all of them.
One of the other questions we had. People are always trying to get us, Chris, to compare our Rieslings with other parts of the world, and specifically people were asking about our Rieslings when they tasted Washington State's Rieslings. What we would find is differences there, and you mentioned just like you had a few thoughts on it.
Well, I mean, I think that's one of the most seductive things about Riesling is that it does exemplify certain characteristics depending on where it comes from. I mean, I love Alsatian Rieslings with their elegance and their brilliantly focused acid. I like Washington Rieslings with their big fruit baskety characters. And I always kind of, in my mind, I've always seen ours as kind of somewhere in the middle there, where we kind of get that acid, and especially with these dry Rieslings, you see this really brilliant edge that emerges from the wine. But we got a little bit of that, especially on these warmer years, a little more of that fruit basket peach pear thing going on there. That I think the wine really brings. It's very unique to the Finger Lakes. what we grow here. You're not going to grow a wine that tastes like this. Just like I'm not trying to grow Washington State Riesling, and I don't want them to try to grow Alsatian Riesling. You know, I like the flavors that we get from Washington. If you're in Washington, that's what I'm going to drink.
One more question for this panel. 2012's Chris and Steve, when were your wines bottled?
When we sent this out, it was bottled that day.
Okay, so very newly
2
bottled.
weeks ago or whatever it was.
How about you, Steve?
About 3 weeks ago.
So yeah, those two wines have both been very recently bottled. I want to just thank this first panel for coming in. Just for time reasons, we're going to have to move on. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a short break, and we're going to come back with our second panel of winemakers. And for our first crew, just want to say thank you to Dave and Steve and Chris, and we appreciate all your information, and thanks for joining us tonight. All right, well, welcome back to our Finger Lakes Wine Month virtual tasting. We're ready for Flight 2, and we have with us three great wines from three great wineries. We're excited to have with us tonight Marty Basinski, one of the owners of Standing Stone Vineyards. And Marty's going to have her 2012 Riesling tonight. Marty, we're excited to have you pour that Riesling. Tell us a little bit about how the wine was made and a little bit about your impressions of 2012 as a growing year.
Well, 2012 was a lot of fun once we got through May. We've been comparing this spring to last spring with all the nerves because we went from really, really hot to really, really cold to really, really hot to really, really cold. It settled out after that, and the summer was warm, dry, things were good, and it just seemed to carry right through to harvest. So it was really a very enjoyable year, again, after we got through Memorial Day. And the wines across the board were a lot of fun to make. They were a lot of fun to grow, and everything seems to be just shaping up really nicely in the cellar. This was This was the first 2012 wine we bottled, and we bottled it in the beginning of March, 2 months ago. Because we were pretty sure we needed it, and so we bottled a little bit. It was our very first experiment with Stelvin, and we're very excited about that, and having a lot of fun having released it, and bottling the rest of it in another month. So that's going to be kind of fun. And this is from, we actually have 2 vineyard blocks of Riesling. Our first vineyard block was actually planted in 1972 by Gold Seal Vineyards, and this was an experimental site to see if Finger Lakes Riesling was even an option, and at the time it was thought to be a bit of a silly idea. But fortunately some people were visionary, and that has carried through.
So for folks who aren't familiar, like that's one of the older Riesling plantings in
Yes.
Finger Lakes. And very neat to be able to try.
And very fun because they actually, this was a very experimental approach to vineyard planting. They spent 3 years researching 100 test sites before they selected our property. And the story is that the guy who was growing other grapes there sold it to them for enough money that he's a very happily retired grape grower, which is a very unusual thing. And then we have another vineyard block we planted 6 years ago that is also a piece of this vineyard, or a piece of this bottling, and this year in the summer we'll be releasing a single vineyard bottling from the Old West block of the Gold Seal Riesling, but this wine is a blend from 2 vineyard blocks.
Very neat. And just as far as in the winemaking, anything unusual with Standing Stone as far as how the wine was made?
I think we're all in agreement that we do sort of the same thing, and I think we all tailor our winemaking, our yeast selection, our temperatures, our fermentation to what we're seeing that year with the blocks. We run 4 to 5 different fermentation lots. I think we had 5 this year with different yeasts. We think it gives us some blending options. It all ends up going pretty much in the same place because Riesling is our biggest seller and we need to keep the market stocked. So rather than experiment with a lot of smaller lots, we focus on getting one good solid Riesling that we can keep in good supply for a year and keep our many distributors happy, which is fun.
Good segue onto where folks can find the Standing Stone wine and what the suggested retail price of that wine is.
Suggested retail price is $13.99, and I know we're in 17 states. I can't in one time ever recite all of them, but they are listed on our website. But most of our distribution is in upstate New York, a little metro New York, now New Jersey, Connecticut is new, and then from there, look at the website.
Yep. Great. We always, when we do a Riesling tasting, folks are always intrigued and they're looking for an answer from us about, do the wines taste different from lake to lake? And we had kind of a back and forth discussion before this tasting started. Marty, you want to just kind of give your take on that, and if there is like differences among the lakes, or if people have to dig a little deeper to get that answer.
Well, we have an interesting table here because we're within 5 miles of each other, all the vineyards, and I think that answers the question. We don't taste the same from vineyard to vineyard. As I said, we're just releasing a single vineyard this year, but when we compare our two blocks, they taste very different. I know that when I taste Mark's wines and Kelby's wines, we're tasting totally different animals. Is some of that the vineyard, the soil, the lay of the land, the way the sun hits the land? Yes. Is some of that our personal preferences with yeasts? Yes. Is some of that the way we like Riesling to taste and the things we eat with that? Yes. And is all of that a piece of what we all call terroir? Yeah. But that's what is so fun about Riesling, where some other varieties tend to be a little more level from site to site and vineyard to vineyard. Riesling really has a very strong affinity to where it's grown, how it's grown, and how it's made, and it just takes on its own personality. We like to all think we help shepherd the personality through into the glass from the soil. But that, I think, is why we are all so entranced with Riesling, because there's just so much cool stuff to happen and play with there.
And for the folks who aren't as familiar with the Finger Lakes, the glaciers kind of drag different soil types across the whole Finger Lakes. And that is a good part of the reason why, even within your own farm, we have these different soil conditions. So kind of, it sounds like we talked about it a little before we got this tasting going. We can't really generalize from lake to lake, even though a lot of people want us to be able to say Keuka Lake, Seneca Lake, they have this or that. So, well, thank you for that, Marty. And I think with that, Marty, we're going to go ahead and move on to Kelby Russell. Kelby is the winemaker at Red Newt Cellars, and he has with him tonight a 2011. So we're kind of going to go back and try another 11. This is a Sawmill Creek Vineyard. That's a single vineyard bottling. And Kelby, you want to tell us a little bit about how that wine was made, and maybe a little bit about Sawmill Creek and any other information about it?
Sure. The Sawmill Creek Vineyard site is actually just a couple hundred yards away from Red Newt, our winery, kind of our cellar door. It's right down the hill towards the lake. It's actually a really unique site in terms of if you were to drive from the road down to the vineyard, it's one of the most remarkable views of the lake that exists, and it's not one that you can see from the road, where you're all of a sudden off the road and there's almost a straight drop down to the lake. It's quite remarkable. It's quite scary to go there and even grape sample. I'm not sure what the picking's like there sometimes, especially if it gets rainy with just how steep the slope is. But it's kind of the perfect example, or the stereotypical example, of a banana belt vineyard, which is what we refer to the southeast side of Seneca Lake, kind of within our community. That's what we refer to that section of the Finger Lakes. That's what all of us are on at this table. The idea being that we have these beautiful steep slopes that face to the west, so they catch all the rays of the setting sun during the summer, and you get this just beautiful sunlight kind of baking the grapes in the best way possible during the height of summer, and really helping us out during those long days in June and July. So Sawmill Creek Vineyards is one of these sites. It's one that Red Newt has worked with for a long time. It's one of the original single vineyard bottlings that we ever conceived of when we started doing those back in '09, and it continues to be a staple for us. It's always just on somewhere in between dry and medium dry. It's usually right on that off-dry cusp. especially 2011. We're looking at low teens in the sugar range. The thing that cuts across this wine every single vintage is Sawmill Creek seems to have this distinct palate weight to the wine. It's kind of a hard thing to describe until you taste the wine, and even though it's this beautiful acid-driven white wine, there's a lot of heavy fruit in the mid-palate when you taste it. A lot of those tropical fruit, the sort of things come through, but Sawmill Creek we also love because there's always a distinct mineral aspect to it. And also a really classic Finger Lakes sort of whip crack of acidity in the finish. You've tasted the wine, it has some weight to it, it's a really interesting minerally wine, and then in the finish you just get this kind of laser-like acidity that always pops out. So this is from a certain block within Sawmill Creek, and it's just been released about a week now. We wait on our single vineyard wines for about 18 months before we release them to the public.
Kelby, this isn't specific to this wine, but one of our media members had asked what made Red Newt embrace making some of the sweeter styles of Riesling?
I think the easiest answer is that it's just fun. We really enjoy those styles of Riesling. We really enjoy expressing the different ways that Riesling comes to us. We have a lot of different sites we're fortunate enough to work with at Red Newt, a lot of different single vineyards, different growers. Starting in 2009 with different single vineyard wines that we looked into, single vineyard Rieslings, I should say. It gave us an opportunity to not just make a dry single vineyard and a semi-dry single vineyard, but each year as the grapes came in, make a decision on whether we wanted semi-dry or even right up into the sweet range. And those sweeter style Rieslings, really low alcohol, 7-8% sometimes, we're finding that they're beautiful right out of the gate, but they're also some of the best aging examples of Riesling that we have in our library. Certainly, they seem to just get better and better as the years go on to probably, hopefully, a limitless extent. We'll have to see, but certainly probably a longer and broader trajectory than other styles of Riesling.
So for as far as production for Red Newt, how is it split up between? We had a media member ask like whether or not the Finger Lakes offered like a certain style or styles. And how does it fall from a production standpoint with Red Newt, with the regular bottlings versus the single vineyard bottlings?
With our regular bottlings, we do about an equal split between dry and semi-dry, a little bit more semi-dry usually, but not by a huge margin. And then with Red Newt, we also have our Circle Riesling, which is a semi-sweet style, and we make, let's see, this last year we made 5 times as much of that as we did any of our other kind of standard Riesling bottlings. When we're talking about single vineyards, there's no kind of philosophy of production with the single vineyard quantities. It's really what the vineyard delivers to us, and kind of each year deciding what we'd like to do with that vineyard in terms of style. And not, and I think that's probably true for most of the Finger Lakes. If you're going to make a reserve style wine, whether it's single vineyard or just reserve, it's really kind of a winemaking decision based on the grapes, and not a decision of this is the sort of sweetness level we need.
We had a question from one of our media members just came in, Calvi, and they had tried some of your single vineyard wines and enjoyed them, and they were interested in how Red Newt came to source the grapes from those vineyards.
With the case of Sawmill Creek, we've been working with them for, I think, all 15 years that Red Newt's been in existence as a winery. We've been working with the growers there for that entire time, both with Riesling and with a lot of other grapes that we get from them, Gewürztraminer, Cab Franc, Cab Sauv, Merlot. And then with our other single vineyards, I think La Homa, if they've tried the La Homa, if they've tried Tango Oaks, those are both sites that Red Newt contract planted with a grower. We paid for, in varying ways, some portion of the planting so that that Riesling would be for ourselves. La Homa is 23 acres of Riesling alone, and we kind of source a single vineyard from within that, but otherwise the rest of it goes into our Riesling blend. There's a new one from 2011 called Bullhorn Creek, and that is a vineyard just about a half-mile south of Red Newt. It's 1 acre of a very low-yielding clone of Riesling in the midst of a bunch of Concord. And we've been working with that for 4 or 5 years as well, ever since that was planted for us. But 2011 was the first year we decided to make a single vineyard out of it.
Very cool. Well, we thank you very much, Kelby, for the information. And again, I don't think that I caught the suggested retail price of that wine.
$20.
$20, and where folks can find that wine?
You can find it in retail stores in upstate and in the city, in New York City, some of the restaurants there. Your best bet is online. Our single vineyards, we only make about 200 cases of them. They get released in May, and they're usually all sold out, other than special allocations, by the middle of June. So online, and we can ship to a bunch of states. I'm not sure what they all are, but that's the best option. Very
good. Well, thank you very much, Kelby. Next up this evening, we have with us Mark Wagner, owner of Lamoureux Landing Wine Cellars. Mark, another owner who's been involved with the Finger Lakes for a number of years. We have a lot of experience here tonight, and Mark definitely would be up on that list. And he's going to share with us some thoughts on his 2012 Red Oak Vineyard. This is another single vineyard bottling, correct, Mark?
Right.
And Mark was another one of the kind of pioneers with single vineyard bottlings. And you want to share with us your thoughts on this wine and give us a little insight into how the wine was made?
Yeah, sure. Our single vineyard bottlings, we have 3 single vineyard bottlings. Red Oak Vineyard was the first of those, and we started in 2009 making it. We have a number of different blocks of Riesling that we bring into the winery at different times during the season, and do a lot of blending in the winery for some of our other wines. But single vineyard wines, we keep those lots separate. We keep all the lots separate, actually. We do about 12 or 15 different lots. And the single vineyards then, in the Red Oak Vineyard, we had 2 different lots in 2012. We did do a little bit of blending between those 2 lots to come up with the final wine. It's cold. It's picked in the morning. We do machine pick. We go through and sort our grapes in the vineyard by dropping any fruit in the ground that is not desirable. And then we go through with our. We bought a new Gregoire harvester last year that has been exceptionally clean fruit, eliminates almost all of the material other than grapes in the fruit, and we get the grapes to the winery within about an hour and get them in the grape press and get control of that fruit and juice very quickly. And can set the temperature in our tanks, and we like to do a cool fermentation on the wine and not have it get so warm that we cook off the wonderful fragrances and smells of the wine. And I'm not sure what else I can say about it. It's a medium dry. We usually finish it with just a little bit of residual sugar. We try to stop at least one of the tank's fermentation so we can do some blending and get the exact amount that we like to have in the wine in the end. And
when was this wine bottled, Mark?
This one was bottled, let's see, this is May already, isn't it? It was bottled in April.
Okay. The Red Oak Vineyard, someone had asked about the age of those vines.
Those were planted in 2006.
Okay.
It's a fairly young vineyard, but it's a beautiful site. The soils are honey oil, silt loam soils in that particular section. And just, I did want to say something about the soil types because you mentioned that, and Marty talked about it a little bit. But the Finger Lakes is just a complete. It's like a patchwork quilt. There's no design to it, and the soils are very different from one field to another. Sometimes within the same field, they can be very different. And if you work with a vineyard long enough, you start to learn what that soil does and how it acts to what you do with it in the winery. And I think it's really important that to make a really good Riesling is to understand what the vineyard is doing, because really ultimately the quality of the fruit coming out of the vineyard is the most important step in the whole process. Without really high quality, good fruit, you can't really make a really good wine.
Very good. I kind of was going to ask this. I'm going to ask this whole panel to go backwards for 1 second. I'm going to start with you, Mark. A lot of our media members have asked for typical something you would enjoy pairing up the wine you brought with you this evening for a wine and food pairing. And it's kind of a common question. The people want to know what they could recommend to folks to enjoy with some of these Finger Lakes Rieslings.
There's just so many possibilities. It's really hard to go anywhere. It's one of the nice things about Riesling. It's so versatile. It goes with a lot of foods. I don't think I'd probably serve it with a big steak, but I would definitely serve it with chicken or pork. And spicy foods, Riesling's perfect. Thai food, and some Chinese food. It's a great wine for all those things.
Kelby, you have a favorite pairing for?
I actually had this just a little bit ago with one of the guys in the bistro kitchen for the staff meal made like an asparagus lasagna. And asparagus is quite the brave thing to try anything wine with, but it actually worked really well. And I think, I don't think you can take that as a general rule perhaps, but there's, especially in this spring season, when you find a Riesling that works with those sorts of flavors, as a lot of our Finger Lakes wines do with that minerality and the nice kind of herbal notes that can be there. They can be a really beautiful pairing that doesn't exist elsewhere.
Very cool. How about for you, Marty?
We do a lot of spicy Chinese food, and Riesling's perfect with that, but I disagree with Mark. I think a rare venison steak on the grill, seared outside with asparagus and maybe some grilled potatoes and Riesling on a hot summer day is just really, really fun. We also do we eat a lot of lamb, and lamb and Riesling is, it's a fight, lamb and Gewurz, lamb and Riesling, but lamb and Riesling is really pretty special.
Thank you very much for that. As we had another question, Mark, for you. As the young vines, fairly young vines in this wine that you brought, someone had wondered how you could see the wine changing as those vines age.
It's a good question. I think there's sometimes some misunderstandings about young vines. While sometimes I think there are some areas in the world where those vines just grow wildly because they're young and wild, and as they age, they slow down. If the viticulture is done well, you can control the size of the vines and actually have very good fruit from young vines. And how it will change over time will become more intense. I don't know that I would say that that's necessarily true. I think it'll be a lot of fun to watch this vineyard and see how it does. And it's one of the beauties of the single vineyard Rieslings is that you actually can do that year after year, is watch the wine and see how it changes over a period of time. Each year is different too, and so that factors in. There's just so many other factors that go into the whole equation, and it's really hard to just define it with one thing about the age of the vine.
Just kind of like another vintage question for you, Mark. A main characteristic of the 2012 wines that you're tasting in the cellar that maybe set them apart from some of the previous years, in particular with Riesling?
Well, 2012 was a very warm year, a very long growing season for upstate. And typically, I think that the Rieslings in our region are better in cooler years. Or I should say, not necessarily better, but I think they last longer in cooler years. And I would say the 2012 Riesling vintage would be a good one to probably drink, in the next 3 to 5 years, drink them up. I don't think they'll age as well as the ones that came from 2009 when we had a really cool year and really high acidity. So the acid's a little bit lighter. A little bit lower, pH is a little bit higher in 2012 than some previous years. But the fruit flavors are beautiful in these young wines. They really are gorgeous.
One more question. I think this is kind of a tough one for people to answer, but we had someone who asked the three of you if you could pick a vineyard anywhere in the world that you could make wine from. Where would you choose to pick it from? Anyone have a stab at that one?
Oh, that's easy. I'd pick a Riesling vineyard in the Finger Lakes. There's no question about it.
You're happy right where you're at.
Yep. That's why we're here.
So, I think like you probably could have asked our first panel and you'd get the same answer. Like, I think we're right where we want to be. Well,
Obviously, whoever answered that question wasn't in the Finger Lakes today.
no, it was also when I first started, tried to convey to people like we're in such a gorgeous time of year right now in the
It is
Finger
pretty
Lakes, and I'll bet for Kelby and Marty when I was driving over, like that, it's just a gorgeous setting. There are these beautiful lakes on these sloped hillsides, and the vineyard's coming alive right now. It's just a spectacular thing to be able to see, and we get to wake up and look at it every day.
I've been forced to do barrel work outside. It's been terrible to have to look at the lake the last 2 weeks.
Our office jobs just are awful.
So,
Fantastic. One thing, could I add one thing?
sure, Mark.
The single vineyard Rieslings, we usually do those in fairly small quantities. The 2012 was about 350 cases, and it's mostly available only at the winery. There are a few outlets in upstate New York that do have it. So get on the internet and you can find it.
Great. Well, on behalf of the Finger Lakes Wine Alliance, we would like to just thank all of our media members for tasting with us this evening, and we'll look forward to getting feedback back from you folks on what you thought of the wines. And on our second panel, we'd like to thank Marty and Kelby and Mark for coming this evening, and thank you very much for joining us tonight. Thank you.